Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fandom Science Podcast. Today's episode is a really special one because we have the head of sport performance and strength and conditioning coach for the St. Louis Blues, Eric Renaghan, who was so generous with his time to sit down with me via Skype and talk about a bunch of different topics, including how the players are staying in shape while the NHL season is postponed, what the strength and conditioning regimen looks like in the regular season compared to the playoffs, pre-game and post-game workouts and the idea behind them and the benefits of them, injury and recovery and how his work can help with that, and of course we talked about drinking beer out of the Stanley Cup. I really hope this provides you with some sort of entertainment while you're sitting at home bored, but most importantly I hope that you're all staying safe and taking care of yourselves and your families. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy. Eric, thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me today. It's not every day that I have a Stanley Cup champ on the podcast, so this is a huge honor for me.
Sure, no problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I'm a huge Blackhawks fan, so seeing you guys go on that run last year hurt my feelings, but congratulations on a well-deserved run. How are you spending your days now with no NHL season? Like, what does work from home look like for you?
I'm trying to piece out my days. Really, I'm trying to spend time with the family first and foremost. Obviously, with our season being as long as it is and the travel schedule being what it is, it makes it tough. In the 8 months plus of playing hockey and traveling to really get that quality time with the family. So I'm using this as an opportunity to do that. But when it comes to work, I'm trying to plan out the windows during the day where I'm reaching out to our athletes, communicating with them on what their needs are, both from a programming perspective and from an equipment supply perspective. I know that a lot of them are stuck at home now and they need to have access to equipment, supplementation, and then programming. So I'm really trying to be diligent about that. And then just taking the opportunity to do some personal and professional development on my own. Obviously, opportunities like this to chat with you and, reading books and doing things like that. I think those are all of the things that have been making up the bulk of my days. And I think it's a huge opportunity for me to continue to capitalize on those opportunities.
Yeah, like it honestly is as crazy as that sounds. It's kind of like a blessing in disguise almost, but I know it's hard to say considering like the times we're living in right now, but these are the times where you can catch up on those kind of stuff where you would never have the time for that during a season. So I'm just wondering, so you're mentioning the players and their workouts, their equipment and all that. Are you able to give them any equipment in the meantime? Like, are you able to provide that?
Well, I haven't been able to give them any equipment. Right before this whole thing happened, and right now we're under a shelter-in-place order from the state of Missouri and then from the city and county of St. Louis. So it's been very difficult for me in terms of getting access to some of that equipment that I might have at the facility to share with our athletes. We played Anaheim probably now it's almost, I guess, 2 weeks ago, and as soon as we arrived home from Anaheim, the NBA had shut down their season, and the NHL soon followed, right? So as soon as we got back, we were told that the facilities were going to be closed and we're not allowed in the facilities, and neither were our athletes. So needless to say, it made it difficult to really gather some of the things that I thought I might need. So what I've been trying to do is connect them with some of my vendors. For the guys that stayed in town, connect them with some of the vendors that I use to get equipment from, and they're helping out. They've been awesome. And then the guys that have taken the opportunity to quarantine themselves in their home cities, I've been trying to help them through reaching out to different vendors in the area through my network and really trying to get as much as I can in their hands in terms of equipment. But it's definitely hard on everybody. So people are being flexible, and I think it just goes to show that people are still willing to help, and it's awesome.
That's awesome. So when everything is back to normal, hopefully sooner rather than later, Are you going to get the players on like an accelerated program or something to catch them up back to shape in order for the playoffs? Or
Yeah, I don't know. It's that's all really up in the air. I think the NHL still hasn't made a decision. Obviously, they're waiting on what the government and the scientists and medical experts deem appropriate in terms of returning to larger group settings. But I think once that decision is made and they figure out what's going to happen with our season, whether it goes from the regular season to the playoffs immediately or not, I think that, from what I've been told, there's going to be a window for us to simulate a modified preseason style camp session where we can get the athletes back on ice, doing some workouts appropriately, and trying to ramp them up for whatever that playoff scenario looks like. So I think we're going to have a little bit of time, but again, it's all up in there right now.
Right. So just out of curiosity, like how do you expect the performance to look like when things, when the NHL playoffs are back, not just from the Blues, but just like the whole league in general? Do you think it's going to look sluggish? Like if you compare the playoffs this year to the upcoming year, to like previous years, do you think it's going to look slower? It's going to look different? What are your expectations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I think it's certainly going to be unique in terms of what we're going to be watching and how the athletes are going to be playing. When you go from game 82 and you got that 4 or 5 day window before the playoffs start, you're really kind of ramping up. Most of the teams that are in the playoffs right at that point their goal has been peaking during that last stretch of the season. And I think it's right now you take that opportunity away to give the athletes that opportunity to peak. And so I don't know, really. I can't say. I think you're probably going to see a little bit of a feeling out period more than you would in a normal playoff series. I think you're going to find that the teams are a little bit more cautious. I think you're going to find that the teams are trying to use the opportunity as efficiently as they can, but I don't know that it's going to look like playoff hockey right off the bat. But again, it might. It's just hard to say.
Yeah, it is. I'm kind of expecting everybody to look almost like William Nylander from last year, where he held out, came back. It was tough for him to kind of get the body going. That's kind of like my expectations. I don't know.
I don't know how he played or not, but I don't know if I can picture that example or not, but I think it's certainly going to be, I don't think it's going to be what we normally see at the start of a regular playoff scenario.
Yeah, but you know what? When it's back, nobody's gonna care because everybody's just so like hungry to watch anything on TV, hockey, NHL, like NBA, anything. People are gonna love it either way. Yeah. So switching gears from all the COVID-19 talks, because it's already depressing not having it on TV. Can you explain how the nature of the strength and conditioning training changes throughout the season? So you kind of just mentioned peaking. So can you describe that like process from the beginning of the season until the end?
Sure. The start of the season, really, you got to look at it from a kind of a developmental perspective, right? If we get an athlete in at the start of the season, we're assuming that's their 100%. That's as good as we're going to get that athlete physically, probably for the remainder of the season. And that's really not, at the fault of the strength and conditioning coach or the team or the player themselves. It's really just a matter of circumstance. And I think when I look at the plan for the season and how I'm going to work with the athletes to develop them and maintain what they were able to accomplish in the off season, it really gets broken down into month by month segments. I think planning for the season, a yearly plan for the season, it really doesn't work well for me because right now I'm a solo operator and I don't have a staff of people working together in my department to really focus on breaking down specific areas with a group of individuals. And I have to think about the team and the players globally in the sense that if these guys come in and we have a slow travel month in October, I can use that to work on a few things that need to be worked on. I can also use that as a way to ramp up the intensities so that when we go on the road quite often in November, we can maintain and reduce some of those strength decays that we might find from travel and a very dense game schedule. So I think if I look at it from a long-term developmental model, I think I get a lot more out of it by chunking into those various months, because as you know, the schedule of an NHL season is 82 games, but month to month, it changes drastically in terms of maybe we're at home more often than not, or we're on the road more often than not. And what that does is it changes the access to equipment, and you're at the mercy of what the schedule dictates. So it's really hard for me to plan out for the year, but it's much easier for me to plan for developing athletes each month, or ramping up to the months where we're not going to have as much training time.
Right. So a lot of it is kind of schedule based. So it probably differs from team to team too. Like it's not like it's a uniform process too. But what about the playoffs? Like, what does the strength and conditioning training look like in the playoffs, where you're playing every other day? The games are much more physical. It's a lot more taxing. How does that look like?
Yeah, it's certainly a different season, right? We look at it from regular season to playoffs, and we think, okay, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to load manage. We're going to rest when we have the opportunity. But I think it really depends on the systems and the style of play that's driven by the coaching staff and the organization, right? Because if I look at it from a strength and conditioning perspective, it's hard to just say what's ideal when you're playing every other day and you have a 7-game series and you might be in the city for 4 of those days. And normal season, in the regular season, you're normally there for 1 day and out. So I think we have to look at it, from that perspective, we have to look at it differently. But on the other end of the spectrum, I have to understand what the demands are of our athletes based off of those systems. So for us, the way we operated last season was we trained more frequently in the postseason than we did during the regular season, because our style of play was very physically demanding, not only on our team, because we were playing a very heavy forecheck style of game. We also had to impose that physicality on the other teams, and that's very physically demanding on them. So for us, the goal was to continue training, keep our loads microdosed, which is a term I take from Derek Hansen, and I utilized that model to keep our athletes under more manageable levels of stress, rather than just taking the day off because it was a day between games. I don't know if that makes sense or answers your question, but we really tried to ramp up what we were doing to make sure we were able to maintain the level that we were at when we got into the playoffs. Because as you know, last year we had to basically play from January through April just to make the playoffs. And I wanted to take that level that we were at the end of the regular season and continue to try to improve upon that. And so we wanted to make sure at bare minimum we were maintaining that level, and rather than resting more, we continued to train.
Okay, that actually makes sense, and that's actually the opposite of the answer that I was expecting. But now that you explain it that way, it definitely makes more sense. So what you're saying is like making the playoffs on its own took so much out of the players that you want to maintain that level of you want to maintain that momentum that they had going in. So you didn't want to give them too much rest, just the optimal amount.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it, the volume of hockey that we played last year was very high, and we were managing loads. The way we were managing loads were on practice days and travel days, and what we were trying to do was use intensity to offset the volume that they were under in terms of the game. And so when we were able to think about it objectively, the intensity that we were able to provide to the athletes at a low volume on a regular basis allowed us to offset that volume and that fatigue factor that comes from playing hockey every day. And so it was a unique way to look at things. I think our coaching staff, all former NHL players, had an idea about, what they thought when they were playing, but it was a new idea for the organization as a whole. And I thought it worked out well for us in terms of, obviously we had some success, but it worked out well for us from the buy-in perspective of the athletes. They bought in and they were into it, and it allowed the model to be successful. So I thought it was overall, it was a unique opportunity to try something that I thought was going to help the organization, and in turn, the people in the organization bought in.
So you just mentioned load management, and like it takes many different shapes throughout different sports. Do you think the NHL will get to a point where load management in the NHL looks like it does in the NBA, where guys are taking games off in the regular season, like way before they even clinch the playoffs? Do you think that's ever going to be a case in hockey?
I don't know that it'll ever get to that level. I think if you look at hockey right now in the NHL, there's a lot of parity within the NHL. And I think just even within the different divisions, the separation, right? If you look at the Pacific Division right now, the separation from the two teams that are in the wild card to the teams the 3 or 4 teams that are fighting for a wild card position, I think right now it's 1 point difference. And some of those teams are even tied. So I think if you look at it from that angle, the parity that's involved in the NHL right now in terms of the competitive level of play right now dictates that every team probably needs their best players every night to maintain that level of play and also to maintain the position that they're in the standings. So I don't know if I ever see it getting to the point where the best players on a team take that night off, because the level of competition in the NHL right now is so close. And I think you can look at maybe 24 to 25 teams right now that are all really contending for playoff spots. And that's, even the other 5 or 6 teams at the bottom of the standings, in any one night can beat you. So I think you have to really have your best product on the ice every night to be successful. And in order to sustain that success, you have to have those guys out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because often load management, like we talk about it from physiological perspective, psychological, all that, but the parity or like the nature of the league has a huge impact on that too. So I wanted to ask you about something. I saw you were involved in a Twitter thread about this a little while ago, and that's pre-game and post-game workouts. Do you mind explaining the benefits of those? And when are they appropriate to have? When are they not appropriate?
Sure. So post-game workouts, I guess I'll start there. I think when I got into the NHL about a decade ago, I tried to learn as much as I could from Mike Potenza. He's the guy that brought me into the league. He's the guy that's really molded how my career has developed in the NHL. And I wanted to really understand the reasoning behind everything. And it was an awesome experience because I was able to dive in head first and really be immersed in the culture of hockey and immersed in the culture of working with professional athletes, which I had only done in the private sector. So really being in a team setting was unique for me, and it was an awesome experience. When I got to the St. Louis Blues, I wanted to bring all of those experiences that I had in San Jose and in Vancouver and try to mold my own program and put a stamp on things. And one of the things that I wanted to do was shift the mentality from post-game lifts, which has always been the way things have been done, at least in my time in the NHL, to a mindset of regeneration and recovery post-game. I think if we look at any one game in hockey, you're going to have some guys, for my team, for example, we have some guys that play up to 25 minutes a night, and we have some guys that might play 5 or 6 minutes. But even with the guys that are playing 5 or 6 minutes, there's a high level of emotion in the game. Those guys are typically playing a very physical game. They're oftentimes on the penalty kill, blocking shots. And so although their duration of time on ice is much smaller than some of our other players, they're not under any less stress, I guess is the best way I could put it. So I want to make sure that when those athletes come off the ice after a game, we're ready to prioritize sleep, nutrition, and recovery, because I need them ready for the next day's practice, if it's a practice day, or if it's a back-to-back game set scenario, I need them ready to play again the next day. So we really have tried to shift that mentality to recovery and regeneration post-game. So I don't know if that answers kind of that first part of the question.
No, that definitely answers it. Yeah.
And that's really it's been a new idea for most of our guys, but it's it's something that we're trying to continually push and focus on, because I think it's so important for the long run, right? Guys getting more regeneration, recovery, and soft tissue work on a regular basis is going to allow them to be more durable and resilient as the season goes on.
And so what about a pregame workout? And I think this is the one that you were, the Twitter thread that I was mentioning was some sports scientists or some strength and conditioning researchers out there were kind of questioning the legitimacy of it. And I saw that you were explaining like why it's beneficial. Like even from a sports psychology perspective, it's good to have a pregame workout to kind of get you in the arousal level. But from a physiological perspective, what's the benefit of it?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways that you can look at game day lifts and even pregame lifts. I think from my perspective, I'm trying to give the athletes as much opportunity to feel as ready as possible to go out and play their best. And ultimately, our goal is to win. And if the guys on the ice feel good and are able to be engaged and start the game on time, as people say, I think we're going to get in the long run, we're going to get on average, better result than not. So if I'm looking at it from that perspective, I want to make sure that during warm-ups, I can be as effective as I can in giving them every opportunity to do that. So one of the things that I was talking about was utilizing some of our technology to identify whether or not I needed to suggest changes to an athlete's warm-up or not. And we have 22, 23 players that dress for a game, and I'd say I have about 10 or 11 guys that are doing this. So, I wasn't suggesting that my entire team does this, and I wasn't suggesting that even the 10 or 11 guys that do this have a change to the warm-up every time. So I think that was what I was kind of getting a little bit frustrated with, because in Twitter you only have 140 characters, right? So you got to really kind of condense your messaging.
Yeah, and everybody's angry on Twitter too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, exactly. So one of the things, one of the things that we do is utilize, we do collect data on a regular basis. I have a lot of data. I have a wide database, but most importantly, I have guys that are really interested in utilizing that data to make themselves better. So the guys that I work with on a game day in terms of making these changes, it's not just sometimes you're looking at making a guy ramp up the nervous system and you're looking at how you can make this guy more excited. That's certainly part of it. That's one of the scenarios that we're working with, is if we see a little bit of need in terms of uptick to the nervous system, we'll suggest some things that they can do. On the other end of the spectrum, there's a few guys that we have that are on the other side of that readiness curve, and they're too excited and take maybe 5 or 6 shifts or even an entire period to kind of calm their nerves down, calm themselves down, and then start their level of play. And that's another area that we try to focus on, is making sure that they're not too excited. And so when we go through our data, we look at these guys, they have a normal routine. We look at that normal routine and we try to find ways to slot in 1 or 2 interventions, depending on what we see, to make their warm-up a little bit more efficient for what their level's like that day. So that's kind of what that Twitter thread was about. The way we identify, I think I got asked the question, well, how do you know it's working in a game? If you only have one guy that scored and you had 10 guys jump, how do you know it's working in a game? Well, the nice thing about hockey is that there's statistics galore to look through, right? And one of the things that we do as an organization is identify players in each position based off of, at least from my perspective, 4 different statistics that are game related that elicit a favorable response in terms of that athlete being considered successful or having a good game. And when I look back at those statistics for the player that the position in the position that they play, they all had favorable statistics based off of what our organization values. So that gives me the confidence to go back and say, let's continue to do that. So at the end of the day, Twitter's about opinion, and people have lots of good opinions, and sometimes people don't like those opinions because it's different from theirs. But at the end of the day, if my organization values certain statistics that come from the game, and those players continue to meet or get close to those levels or the standard of those levels, then I'm going to continue to do that pregame warm-up and intervention.
Yeah, because I mean, when I was kind of reading that, the question popped in my head is like, when you have a team, or like when you're in a position like yours, you're confined to a small sample, which is just the roster of the St. Louis Blues. Like, you're not afforded the luxury of a lab where you can have like a randomized control trial and look at differences between groups and all that. So you're in a much trickier position when you're working like practically in the field and trying to find short-term results, because that's how the business is oriented. And I think sometimes like people forget that difference exists between a lab setting and like a practical pro sports setting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's definitely a dichotomy between research and application sometimes, right? So if I'm looking at it from the position that I'm in and the office that I sit in right now, my entire directive from our organization is to give our athletes the ability to be available to be selected for the lineup, number one. And if an athlete does get injured, try to make them stronger as fast as possible. So really, I have one directive: allow my athletes to perform as well as they can by giving them as many opportunities to do that as I can. As a strength and conditioning / sports science / nutrition guy, right? I'm doing all of those things. So if I can find something that I think is going to work and have a guy that's willing to try it, and he goes out and has a good game, potentially there's a placebo effect to that. But even at the end of the day, when we think about a placebo, if the athlete feels good and is in a good mental state, then that's going to allow them to be effective. And so if I can utilize these different tools that we have access to give our athletes a more mental or a more clear mental state and give them some more confidence in their abilities, and for me, it's a win. And if it's a win for me by the athlete being engaged, then, like I said before, on average, we're going to have more favorable outcomes than not. So I think that for me is number one, because I need to help our team win, and that's all our team is caring about right now is winning. And so if I can provide that for our athletes in any small way, then for me, it's a victory.
Yeah, like you mentioned, a placebo is the most powerful drug that you can have. So if someone feels like it works for them and it's helping them, then there's no harm in at least just kind of letting them believe that, like at the very least. So you're talking about tracking on ice performance. I'm just wondering, how do you incorporate analytics in your work? So like, how do you marry the data that you get from from the gym with the players on ice performance? Like, do you work closely with the analytics department, with the coaching staff? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's two things that I'm doing on a regular basis. Number one, it's first and foremost communicating with the coaching staff. I have to understand what their opinion is of the athletes. I also have to understand how these athletes individually are going to fit into the team and the lineup. And really, I think Matt Price said this one time, and it really stuck with me, that you have to, I think he said you have to have a PhD in the sport, if I'm remembering correctly. But that really resonated with me because I didn't come from hockey and I didn't play hockey growing up. So I've always really had to understand how to read the game better and learn the game and focus on some of the things that are, especially early in my career, were foreign to me. So first and foremost, my communication is happening on a regular basis with our coaching staff. So I understand the situational perspective of what's going on with the athletes. And then on the other end of that, I'm working with our data analyst, especially in terms of the game data, to understand, like I said before, what our athletes in the different positional groups are doing in terms of valued statistics. And again, I'm making sure that what I'm doing is trying to meet the organizational goal, not just train a defenseman in a certain way because I think that's what a defenseman needs. I'm trying to allow these players to, as efficiently as they can, express their abilities so that they meet the valued standards of the different statistics that our organization holds in high regard. So I'm working with those guys to better understand the mechanical and the physiological aspects of what I can assist with in terms of training, returning an athlete to sport more quickly and more appropriately, and allowing them to fit themselves back into the team so that they're able to play the systems and the style that our coach wants us to play.
So I know that the players are not allowed to wear monitors in regular season games in the NHL, but the league is introducing a chip next year where they can wear it in the jerseys. I'm wondering, is that going to provide any data for you as a strength and conditioning coach that you can use, or is that mostly for the analytics department to track like zone entries and stuff like that?
I don't know that it's going to be as useful to me as a strength and conditioning coach as it will to our data analyst. I'm not going to have access to that in practices unless our team decides to put chips in all the practice jerseys. And so that information that's happening in a game isn't going to be telling me the same information that I'm going to be able to collect from practice from the wearable technology that we utilize. So I don't know that it's going to give me an advantage as a strength and conditioning professional in terms of creating better interventions or even impacting my decision-making processes. So I don't know. I don't know that it's going to help. I think it will help our data analysts be more specific in terms of some of the things that they're looking at on the statistics, right? Like you mentioned zone entries or even zone denials. I think those are two specific statistics that potentially are being used to identify players in each position that are having a successful game. So if that gives them a better opportunity and even a more accurate opportunity to analyze these players, it's going to make my job easier in the long run. So I don't know if it's going to directly impact me or not, but I do feel like there's going to be some value that you can collect from it. I just don't see it impacting my day-to-day operations or my decision-making processes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is a question that I've kind of been thinking about for quite a while now. I had to write a paper last year as kind of like my candidacy exam. A part of it was on like the genetic makeup of an athlete. I'm wondering, so as sports science gets more advanced, we're starting to find out like more and more about genetics and the role in injury risk and response to training and all that stuff. So has that genetic testing made its way into the NHL at all, or do you think it's still in its infancy and too early for that?
I'd say if I'm going to give you an educated guess, I would say we're still in the infancy in regards to understanding how genetics are directly impacting athletic ability, injury resiliency, and just overall health. There are certain teams, I know the Sharks and Vancouver and some of the teams that I've had experiences with, and even other teams that I don't have direct experiences with, are doing a lot with biomarker analysis. They're doing a lot with trying to understand how what's going on inside the body is impacting the product on the ice. I think that's a very valuable area for us to continue to explore. We're trying to do a lot with biomarker analysis and understanding how information is impacting our athletes, what type of supplements and interventions we can provide to the athletes that are more specific to them individually. But I would say we're way off in terms of utilizing that genetic code or marker to identify how these athletes are performing. I think we're certainly in the infancy there.
Yeah, I think from like a training adaptability perspective, as far as like differences between people, how they respond to training, the genetics work on that is pretty good. But I think injury-wise, the data is still like sketchy for lack of a better word, wherein like it's prone to a lot of statistical errors. So I think that's going to take a lot longer to make its way into pro sports. But you were mentioning the bioanalysis. Like, what kind of data do you track with that? What kind of biomarkers do you look for, if you can even disclose that?
Yeah, I mean, I can share a little bit. We're definitely looking at biomarkers in terms of the athlete's health. I think that's our biggest concern overall, is because the duration of our season and I think in general, the differences that go on from travel to being at home are pretty huge for us, right? Our circadian rhythms are off quite often. If we're going west, we're traveling for 2 hours. If we're going east, we're traveling for 1. So we have a lot, because we're in the central division. We're making trips to both coasts very frequently. So we're always changing time zones. I think that's something that we have to understand in terms of the biomarkers that we're collecting. We're utilizing some of this information to really try to impact our fatigue levels, our rest levels. And then, like I said earlier, one of the variables that we look for is C-reactive protein. That's an indicator for inflammation in the body. And that inflammatory response is going to open up the avenue for us to have better conversations with our athletes on potentially some of the hidden information that we don't have access to just because of the general rules of NHL and the lifestyle that our athletes are choosing to live outside of the rink are out of our control. So if we can have better conversations by having some objective information to spark those conversations, then we're going to have a better chance at helping the athlete.
So I was reading this paper a while ago from 2014. It said that between 2006 to 2012, there was 40,943 man games lost because of injury in the NHL. That added up to a total of $218 million in lost salary. So, like, it goes without saying, injury is a huge concern for all pro sports, not just in the NHL. I'm wondering if you can explain to me and to the audience, how does strength and conditioning prevent or minimize the chance of injury?
Yeah, I think man games lost are certainly on the front of certain. Let me restart this. I guess the medical department is impacted most directly by man games lost, outside of the direct financial hit to the organization. So when we look at man games lost as a number, it certainly looks big and impactful. I think what we have to understand is man games lost to the athlete isn't as important, because the athlete's focused on getting better. And oftentimes we have to sometimes delay that athlete returning to sport. Even though the pathology has cleared itself, we have to delay that return to sport so that once that athlete's back in the lineup, they're performing at an optimal level. And I think that's really where it gets to be a little bit of a gray area for man games lost and the performance department and the medical department, because oftentimes in my experience in the past, an athlete clears certain hurdles, the pain is gone, the pathology is cleared, and all of a sudden they're back in the lineup. And then what happens after a game or two? The general manager, the coach comes down and says, this guy looks like he's still out of shape. And 6 weeks prior to that, he was in a walking boot, and he takes the walking boot off, everything's clear, and he's back in the lineup. And what happens is you're putting an athlete in a scenario where, although their pathology is gone, their level of performance might not be even close to what it was prior to their injury. So I would say strength and conditioning and sports science are really trying to improve that area of man games lost and getting athletes returning to sport more appropriately. I think in general, there's a lot of luck involved in sport, and whether you get hurt or not. And there's too many factors for us to consider to say that strength conditioning is going to completely reduce those chances of injury happening. But I will say that the more information that we can collect from our athletes on a day-to-day basis, and the better we can get at making appropriate decisions for the individual athlete, the smaller that gap becomes. And I guess that's as far as I'm going to go in terms of saying strength and conditioning definitely is impacting injuries or not. I would say we're able to close that gap a little bit more, but I don't think that there's any way to say that what we do is going to completely prevent injury from happening.
When it comes to concussion injuries, I'm sure you've heard this too. The time on ice, the total time on ice during a season is not a big predictor of getting a concussion. So like the total exposure to hockey. But what does predict concussion risk is time on ice per game. So in-game fatigue. I'm wondering, does the same thing apply to musculoskeletal injuries too? Or like what are the predictors of injuries that you try to minimize when you look at the data?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be time on ice that necessarily predicts injury. Certainly if you're playing heavy minutes, and like I said before, you're playing 25 minutes, you're probably also playing a lot of special teams, and there's definitely going to be impact on the body, and fatigue certainly is going to allow those athletes to lose a little bit of quality in terms of movement. And when it comes to hockey, as you know, force distribution, being able to dissipate forces and tolerate forces from guys hitting you is huge. And if you are under high levels of fatigue, your ability to do those things diminish. And in turn, you certainly will be put at a little bit higher chance for injury, or the probability rises for potential injury. That's why one of the things that we try to focus on with our athletes is offsetting that volume of time on ice and this volume of just practicing and playing hockey games with intensity. And we try to get that quality across to our athletes individually so that they, a guy that's playing 25 minutes and a guy that plays 8 minutes on average aren't going to be under the same level of volume. So we individualize those prescriptions. But what we do is we really try to prioritize that level of intensity to offset that volume. And it allows our guys to build up, in my opinion, a level of tolerance so that their fatigue becomes less impactful on their movement quality. So I hope that answers your question, but that's the way I perceive the injury risks in guys that play heavy minutes. And by providing that opportunity, I think that really does reduce the probability of injury. But again, we can't eliminate that potential from happening.
So from a general perspective too, not just like on a game-to-game basis, but just the schedule in general, the NHL introduced a bye week, I think in 2016, 2017. And so on the surface that looked good, but that also makes the schedule a lot more condensed because you still got to play the same number of games. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, do you think that there are some changes that still need to be done from like a league-wide perspective to minimize the load on those guys?
Well, I think that's above my pay grade in terms of talking about that. But I will say that from my perspective, when we have longer breaks in between our games or longer windows of inactivity, we take longer to ramp ourselves back up. So I will say that the break can come at an inopportune time for some teams, and sometimes it can come at that perfect time. So I don't know if the bye week in general is good or bad. I think it depends on the team and the situation that team is in. For us, it was this year, it was backed up to the All-Star break, which for us, we were hosting. So it was probably beneficial for a lot of our organization because most of the people in our organization, including our head coach, were involved in the All-Star game. So it wasn't really a break for anyone involved in our organization. So I think this year it panned out for us to be pretty beneficial. But I know with other teams, it could come at the worst possible time where they're peaking, they're playing well, they may have gone on maybe 5, 6, 7 game win streak, and then all of a sudden they're on a break. And that could be pretty detrimental for them in many ways. So I think it just really is dependent on what that team's doing and what's going on with that team at that point in the season.
So this is like a hot topic right now with all the, with the stoppage of play in those days, the talk about the draft and the draft combine, when are they going to do it and all that. I'm wondering, how much stock do you put in the NHL combine? Like, from your opinion, from your experience, when you look at evaluating a prospect, I know you're not in the talent identification field, but still, when you see someone's combine data, like, how much stock do you put in that?
Well, let me start off by saying the Combine has done a great job in the last 10 years to really progress. I would say the NHL Combine committee that's made up of a variety of strength and conditioning professionals from the NHL has done an exceptional job at that. So let me start by saying that. And then I guess to answer your question more specifically, what I think I get most out of the NHL Combine is the ability to see where I'm going to be starting with the potential athletes that we might draft. And what I mean by that is I'm going to train an athlete based off my assessments and how those new athletes fit into what of them. So that's really what's going to drive my work with our athletes, whether they're a prospect that's just been drafted or one that a free agent. I think it really has to be done that way. From the Combine, I'm really getting that information to provide me a base level of knowledge on what I'm going to be seeing when they walk in the door on that first day. So what I mean by that is an athlete that scores very well on the multiple Combine tests or even on a few of the Combine tests tells me that I'm working with an athlete that probably has a little bit higher training age than others, probably has a little bit more experience in a variety of training methods and training or even testing. And that's going to allow me to potentially expedite a little bit quicker on what we're going to have to focus on. Now, with an athlete that goes to the Combine that doesn't score well on those tests but tries hard, I'm getting a lot of information as well. So I'm really trying to, I think the best way to put it is I'm trying to see what type of person we're getting, so I have a better understanding of what I'm working with. Right. I don't know if that that's kind of, for me, that's really what I'm getting out of the Combine. I'm trying to understand the type of athlete we're getting in terms of experiences and mentality and effort level, and then take that snapshot of information from that 1 or 2 day window that I was able to observe them and see how they're going to fit into our model based off of all the other things that we're doing to more specifically identify how they play and how they fit into our training programs and where we think they're going to fit and how soon they're going to fit into our organizational model.
Yeah, because I think in recent years, more and more people have started to look at the Combine as, they started write it off, essentially, meaning they don't place too much stock on it. But I think it's just like any other form of data. Doesn't it just depend on how you look at it or how you use it that makes the importance for you?
Yeah, I think there's certainly things in the Combine in terms of the objective information that's being collected that doesn't impact my decision making either way. There's other variables that are being collected from the Combine that I utilize with a lot of granularity, and there's going to be differences not only from organization to organization, but strength coach to strength coach. You're going to have a lot of differences in how teams are assessing what information may be collected from the Combine that is in the exact same manner that they collect data. So I think you're going to find there's going to be a wide range of opinion on the Combine. Like I said, for me, I'm really collecting a lot more of what I would say is subjective information and trying to blend that in with the objective information that I'm collecting as soon as they walk into our doors on that first day.
Mm-hmm. I think you just kind of mentioned free agents a bit earlier. when you're talking. So when a player gets traded to the Blues or any team that you're working on, they have to go through an adjustment period with, on ice strategies, the X's and O's and all that stuff. But as far as strength and conditioning, do they also have to go through an adjustment period there, or has that training schedule on from a general standpoint, has that become uniform across the league, or is it that different team to team?
No, there's definitely going to be an adjustment there as well. There's going to be a wide range of methods that are used in the NHL to train athletes. I don't think there's any wrong or right way to train an athlete. The NHL right now, I would say, has got an abundance of high-level strength and conditioning professionals. I mean, it's awesome. With that said, I think when you have an athlete that comes from another team, I'm trying to, in most cases, reach out to that team strength and conditioning coach and talk to them about the guy and see what they've been doing. And really what I want to do is I want to make that transition for the athlete as smooth and comfortable as possible. And I want to make sure that I understand what they like to do and what they have been doing so that I can make them feel like what we're offering is inviting. And I think at the end of the day, I want that athlete to want to come into the gym within our organization and be a part of what we're doing. So I have to be flexible, and the relationship that I have with most of the other strength coaches is one that I can call them or send them a text and ask about, what do you think about this guy, and what does he like to do, and what have you guys been working on, and maybe where are some of his weaknesses in your opinion. And I want to make sure I take that information and really utilize that to shape how I'm going to onboard him into our not only culture, but the methods that we're using to improve our guys.
So, as much as you guys all care about your own teams and the success of your own teams, but you're also kind of like a tight-knit community. There's only 30 of you in the whole league, or 31. So, you guys talk to each other, you help each other out sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm close with all 30 other strength and conditioning coaches in the NHL. I mean, and then, on top of that, you have most teams now have an assistant, part-time or full-time, or a sports science guy, or interns. And so there's, the staffs are certainly growing in the NHL, which is incredible. And I think it's going to really help continue to push the field forward in terms of hockey development. But, you reach out and you're closer with some guys than others. But at the end of the day, I think we all have a mutual respect for each other. And you want to make sure that when an athlete leaves your organization and goes somewhere else, that guy is in a good spot in terms of their ability and, their mindset and their level of knowledge. And you want to make sure that you're giving that opportunity for those players to be successful when they leave your team, and vice versa. When you get a guy, you're hoping that they have that. And so I think by us, by guys sharing and talking with each other and being open, I think that really helps not only the league grow, but it helps our little chunk of the industry get better. So I think it's an awesome thing that guys are willing to chat with each other and talk. And it's certainly something that I utilize when we get new guys, is that level of communication that I hope to have with the other strength and conditioning coaches.
Usually you expect people in your position to kind of hold everything close to their chest, not divulge too much, but you're also active on Twitter. You share knowledge as much as you can, which is great to see. I mean, I wish everybody did that, because that's more for us to learn and more for sports fans just to track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know that. I mean, I think there's some special sauces that go on in every team. And there's some things that are unique that make things work for you and your organization or your situation. And I think those are the things that are, what we call a competitive advantage. And you're going to hold those cards close to your chest. But I think at the end of the day, the only way for us to improve, not only as a league, but more so as an industry, is to share information. And like I said, I'm not providing specific details on different players when I share on Twitter or with other coaches, but I'm sharing experiences, and I'm sharing I'm sharing ideas and things that, if someone responds to me and says, that's a terrible idea, we tried it didn't work, and this is why, then I can move on and I can stop wasting time on things that, are shown to not work. So I think it's a two-way street, and I want to learn more, and that's why I share. And I feel like I've gotten a lot back from people that are a lot smarter than me. And I think that's where I've really grown to enjoy going on Twitter and doing podcasts and listening to podcasts, because it gives me an opportunity not only to share what worked well for me, but learn from others and try to continue to develop my model and the way I operate.
Right. Well, you've been super generous with your time today. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm sure you're busy, but I do want to end on this question. Who on the St. Louis Blues roster is just like an absolute freak in the gym that you wouldn't expect him to be? Like, you look at this guy, you wouldn't be able to tell, but you get him in the gym and he's the beast. And is it Vladimir Tarasenko?
That's a good question. We've got a lot of beasts on our team for, in a variety of ways. Let me tell you one thing. I think one of the guys that I've come to respect the most in the NHL, not only for his physical ability, his desire to improve, his professionalism, and his willingness to dive head first into what we're doing in the gym, but more so as a dad and a family man, is Jay Bouwmeester. And I guess if you look at how many games he's played in the league and the championships that he's won in his career, you might think this guy's in pretty good shape, but I think he's probably our most unassuming beast. And, I know he's recovering from his procedure that he had recently, and he had a cardiac event that I think has been well documented. But I would say he's the guy that I've come to respect the most on our roster, and I think he's our most unassuming beast for sure.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask you about that. So, how's his recovery process been? Is he all good and hopefully taking?
Yeah, he's doing well. No, he's doing well. He's obviously at home, quarantining with everyone else, but he's healthy. He's in good spirits. Prior to this shelter in place, he was at the rink and he was there for games and spending time in the gym, hanging out, having a coffee, talking to the boys, and just being around. I think that was super motivating for the group. I think it was helpful for Bo. But in general, yeah, he's doing well, and I think he's excited about his future. And once all this ends with the self-quarantining, I think obviously I'm looking forward to getting together with him and having a coffee. So he's doing well, and I'm sure he appreciates all of the well wishes that he received.
That's amazing to hear. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize like the work that you did, the medical staff did to kind of revive him right there and then. Like, you guys did an amazing job too. So well done. And I'm sure he. Yeah,
I was not involved in the immediate triage of his situation. But yeah, our medical staff, our equipment staff, the medical staff and the doctors from Anaheim, and then the paramedics, they were phenomenal. And, they all contributed to saving Bo's life. And so because I'm close with Bo and I respect him, I'll be forever grateful to them for the work they did. But, I was not in the room. I was in the room. I wasn't out there triaging his situation at all. So I don't want to take credit for that. But our staff and the medical staff of the Ducks, like I said, they were amazing.
It's amazing to hear that he's made a full recovery or on his way to a full recovery. I know I said that I was going to end on that, but I do have another question for you. Did you get to spend a day with the cup like the players do when they win? Yeah, I did actually. It was awesome. We brought it to our. Yeah. So I got it at the end of August, which was actually perfect timing because in St. Louis, school starts, I think in the third week of August. So what we did was we brought the cup to my daughter's school.
We had an assembly, and all the different classes got to come up and take a picture with the cup. From there, we brought it back to the house and had a party with friends and family, and then we were able to take it to a nice restaurant who hosted us in a private room and had a very close-knit family and friends dinner with the cup. So it was an amazing experience, and one I'll never forget.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the over-under on beers consumed out of the cup by you and also by the team in total?
I think that number is uncountable.
Yeah, there's not enough machine learning to count that.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. No. Good question, awesome, though.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks so much for taking the time. You've been very generous with your time. I appreciate it. Anywhere people can find you on Twitter, website?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably most active on Twitter. My handle is at Eric Renaghan. I'm probably, like I'd say, most active there and easiest to connect with there. So.
Perfect, on Twitter. Again, thanks a lot. Continued success. Best of luck the rest of the season, except for when you play the Hawks, although you don't need luck when you play us because we suck and you're going to beat us anyway. But thanks a lot, Eric. Take care.
No problem, Lou. Thank you.